Good afternoon, everybody from OPJGU Global University. I'm Dr. Moushami Mukherjee, Associate Professor and Deputy Director at the International Institute of Higher Education Research and Capacity Building. I welcome all of you to this special session, panel discussion on student experiences in research universities, India COVID-19 survey, a survey that we ran early this year. We are going to share some findings from that survey with all of you today, with my colleagues here at the International Institute of Higher Education, who have been involved in running the survey and analyzing the survey data and preparing the report, which we are going to release in collaboration with the Association of Indian Universities very soon. Let me now quickly share a presentation that we have prepared for all of you. And I'm going to begin talking about this survey, sharing the survey findings with all of you along with my colleagues here. And now, I am sure all of you would agree that we are all going through very unprecedented kind of time in human history around the world, and all walks of our life have been deeply impacted by the global health pandemic, which is ongoing. And that's the reason we are having this entire conference in an online mode. Me and my colleague here, Deepak Vaughan, and another colleague, early last year, we ran internally within OPJGU Global University a pilot survey after the first online semester to learn a bit about our student experiences with a fully online semester. Actually, the first month of the semester, spring semester 2020, we had classes on campus, but mid-March onwards, as all of you know, with the lockdown and everything, we had to immediately, within a month, transition to a fully online mode. And we were curious to learn about the students' experiences. So my colleague Deepak Mon, Tatiana Belosova, and we ran an internal pilot study within JGU to learn about this experience, the findings of which we have recently published in a Routledge publication, and we are going to share that information with all of you. Very soon, maybe in the chat, my colleague Deepak can share that information. Those of you who are watching us on YouTube, we can share it on the YouTube chat, the information of the publication. But this today, what we are sharing with you is findings from a larger national level study that we ran early this year. Spring 2021. Now, after we ran this pilot study, me and my colleagues, we came across, as an institute of higher education, we are connected to other institutes of higher education in different parts of the world. We came across information from the Center for Studies in Higher Education at UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, that they actually designed a survey instrument and ran a survey in the United States through this consortium called CERO Consortium, Student Experience in Research Universities Consortium, which is based at the University of California, Berkeley. And they were looking for partners around the world to run this survey in other countries also, so that some kind of a comparative analysis can be made in the future about student experiences around the world in the middle of the pandemic. So that was the beginning of our partnership and collaboration. We sent a proposal to the CERO Consortium at UC Berkeley, and they accepted our proposal, but we realized that the survey instrument, the tool that they have designed was not really suitable for the Indian context, because of the obvious difference of the higher education context in the US and here in India. There were many terminologies used in that survey which would make no sense for students here in India. So my colleagues and I at the International Institute of Higher Education here at OPJGU Global University, we worked on that survey for some time to adapt it to the larger Indian context and get the necessary ethics approval in fall semester last year, and then ran the survey this year in spring 2021. And the survey actually consisted of several questions for the students, over 40 questions, but they were broadly divided into 5 domains to understand students' transition to remote instruction, the financial impact of COVID-19 on students, and students' health and well-being during the pandemic, their sense of belonging and engagement, and finally, the students' plans for the future, graduation plan and future plan. This is how the survey instrument was designed. But the problem in front of us was, how do we run a national level survey? We ran an internal survey within a university. How do we run a national level survey to get a eye view picture of students' experiences across the diverse higher education setting that we have within India? So therein came in the partnership with our Association of Indian Universities, OPJGU Global University. We are a member of Association of University, and as many of you know, that all the NAC accredited reputed universities across India are members of this association. So the association, the partnership with AIU, Association of Indian Universities, was necessary for us to reach out to students across India, and this was the beginning of our partnership with AIU. So we sent another proposal to AIU, and luckily, the AIU leadership and the research division were also very prompt in responding to our request and partnering with us for this project. And as you all can see up here on the screen, the entire survey was done online. The online survey link was designed by us here at OPJGU Global University, and thereafter Association of Indian Universities shared it through email to all the member universities across India, especially the research universities, central university, public state universities, private universities across India. And because this survey was meant to capture student experiences in research universities, so we purposely did not share it with only undergraduate teaching colleges. Now, the survey was not just sent by email by Association of Indian Universities, but they also shared the survey on their website. As you can see, I have shared the source from AIU website where the survey is still there. The survey link is still there. We also created a mobile-friendly, QR code, and so that people can just even using those who don't have access to a computer, but if they have a mobile smartphone, through that also, so that they can take the survey. Hereafter, I'm going to pass on to my colleague here, Professor Deepak Mon. He's going to talk a little bit about the methodology of the survey in detail. And thereafter, we have our research fellows, 3 research fellows, Raju Karjigi, Sandal Agarwal, and Prerna Sharma. They are going to share with you some of the findings. And also, finally, we have Professor Nisha Nair, who is going to conclude this session with some of the policy recommendations that we have made based on the survey findings. Over to you, Professor Mon.
Thank you, Moshmi. So, greetings, everyone. So, as Moshmi Dr. Moshmi said about the survey, we have tried our best to reach as many students as possible. But if you can go back and just the first three clicks back, let's focus on the first part. A total of 7,688 students actually responded to the survey. And given the Indian higher education system, we have more than 3 million students. So this is a small number. I would say this is a minuscule number. And the limitation that I see, this is definitely not a representative sample. As we can see, a total of 38 universities, students from 38 universities participated in this survey, which again, given we have 1,000 plus universities now, this is a small sample set, small subset of the total universities. We cannot say this is a representative survey, but given the condition of pandemic, the only option that we had was to use an online mode. That's a big limitation that we had. Again, this has led to sampling biases because in terms of central universities, the participation is just 4 central universities are represented in this survey. Primarily, I guess because there could be multiple reasons. We'll see in the demographics also, the demographics of central university students who have participated in the survey differ from other state universities as well as the private universities. One reason could have been that, say, at our university, all the students have their official email IDs, and it's easy to access for the admin to access these students through those email IDs, and they are regularly accessed. All the information is passed on there. But that may not be the case across all the universities, especially given there are so many colleges also within the universities. So that kind of infrastructure may be lacking there. Now, out of these 7,688 respondents, we had to drop for this analysis 1,263 respondents because uh, we very consciously had not made a lot of questions compulsory. In fact, most of the questions were not compulsory, and several students had left the surveys incomplete. As Dr. Moshmi told, it was a longish survey, I would say 43 questions, including some of the questions that required you to write text. And that way, the dropout rate was high. Again, several of the students had left the name of the university itself uh, blank, or it was incomprehensible, which basically means they had to be removed from the sample. All in all, there were 6,425 students from 38 universities, and the breakup is given there: 4 central, 20 state, and 14 private universities. And within that, majority of these students were actually undergraduate student overall. But if we look at this graph on the lower part of the screen, we can see that central universities, of the total respondents, 65% were actually masters or PhD students, as opposed to state public universities or private universities, where it was actually reverse. More undergraduate students responded. That's also visible probably in the way you can easily see. Only 4 central universities responded. Probably the people who have more access to or the universities have better access to masters and PhD students because their numbers are smaller, and hence that's just a conjecture that I'm making, but that could be the reason. In terms of the enrollment, most of the respondents, 65% of the respondents out of these 6,425, which we have finally analyzed, 65% were from the private universities. 32% were from state universities, and only 3% were from the central universities. This just a caveat here that we have data about the university of the students, but as Indian population would be aware, for the international audience here, we have a lot of colleges. We have 1,000 plus universities, but within universities, there are 3 kind of universities, which we have broadly categorized. All the in terms of higher education institutions, there are more than 16 kinds of higher education institutions. Broadly, we can say they get into existence either as through a central government legislation, which is union government legislation, or through a state government legislation. The state government legislation can allow a public university, which is funded by the state, to come into existence, or a private university, Again, the difference is the state private universities, they are not allowed to have any affiliated colleges, while most of the affiliated colleges, we have 40,000 plus colleges where majority of our students study, and these are affiliated to the state public universities, which is where 32%, we do not have that distinction whether these students are were studying at the main campus of the university or were they in affiliated colleges. And most of these affiliated colleges, almost 75% plus, are actually private colleges. So the university, although is public, the colleges where these students are actually studying are private. So that's another caveat about the data. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, in terms of sample composition, one more click. Uh, Now, this is not surprising. Just go to the previous graph. Yes. Uh, this is actually not surprising that 65% of our students were actually from private universities, which are where the fees is relatively high to very high, depends on the kind of university, but definitely much higher than the public universities. And again, within public universities, it was majorly state public university where I have clarified that it was mostly we are assuming that because most of the students are studying in colleges, they were part of the colleges and not the main campus. So we can see the social class bias of the sample. Almost 48% of the students said they belong to middle class, 10% to upper middle or professional, 2% to wealthy. Only say around 8 and 5, 13% of the students, less than 13% said they belong to working class or low income or poor groups. 27% did not disclose. Again, a reason, we did not force any compulsory questions. So because pandemic itself was having a negative impact and we did not want any questions to become trigger questions for them. So we had consciously made that choice. As a result, 27% of the students did not disclose, but we can see the social class bias. And I've conjectured about the reasoning why this bias is visible, and hence we cannot say that this is a very representative sample of the Indian student population as a whole. But again, this is the data that we have. We will be able to draw some conclusions on the basis of this. Can you go to the next graph? In terms of gender, interestingly, 55% of the respondents were women. Men were just 13%. Again, 27% of the students decided not to disclose their gender identity. We gave them option of the survey itself, the original Seru survey gave this choice of third gender, prefer to self-prescribe or prefer not to answer. And we gave this option in the survey. It's a minuscule percentage, but again, it is important to realize that within this Indian context, these people coming out and identifying themselves as not a male or a female, again, this is a significant number. So next, we'll go through the findings of the survey. This is the demographics and the survey. I guess I've majorly covered. We did go through initially when we were modifying the survey. We had designed this as a project, and we went through the ethics clearance. We have a institutional review board at our university. We went through that, and after that, we floated this survey. The analysis was done using SPSS, and the data again was converted from text to we coded it in SPSS and then ran the whole analysis. Over for the analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I'm Prerna Sharma, and I shall be talking about the findings. So, as many universities shifted to the online platform, the idea was to then understand whether students were able to adapt to the new online instructions implemented by their respective universities in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We analyzed the responses by students, gender, social class, and university type. So, our main findings were that women and third gender students adapted well to the online transition compared to men. This is probably because the studying online from home was more accessible for the women and third gender students in the sample. There were not any major differences across socio-economic groups in terms of adaptation to online learning. This could be because majority of the students belong to the middle, upper middle or professional middle class, and the rest, irrespective of socio-economic class, who took the online Zero India survey already had access to digital technology. Multidisciplinary university students were able to adapt better. This was probably because due to higher proportion of students who did not require access to labs or practical work compared to students at other universities that need more hands-on learning. Further, this analysis also looked upon the factors that were an obstacle to successful transition to online learning. Across the sample, 37% students highlighted a lack of interaction and communication with other students as a major impediment to their online transition. 34% found themselves unable to learn effectively in an online format. Lack of motivation was among 26% of the students, and the lack of access to an appropriate study space was for 27%, were the top factors that led to challenges in transition. It also appeared from the survey that lack of interaction and communication with the peers in classroom was the most important obstacle faced by students during online classes. Thereafter, inability to learn effectively in online format appeared to be a major obstacle. The findings from the survey also showed us that compared to women, men found lack of interaction and communication as well as the online format as major obstacles for learning. There were also a few positive academic experiences which were associated with remote instruction and online learning. The major findings in that case were that the students from private universities appeared to be more satisfied with the way universities responded to the COVID-19 pandemic compared to students from central and public universities. These include satisfaction with support received from instructors and the overall quality of courses. It also appeared from the survey that large percentage of undergraduate and also masters and PhD students from private institutions had prior exposure to online learning. With regard to class, more than half of the wealthy students already had taken online courses for academic credits prior to the pandemic. This finding appears to be very obvious. With regards to gender and women, third gender, and those who prefer to self describe are not to say constitute the largest percentage of students who had taken online academic courses for credit online prior to the pandemic. Since distance learning education always catered to the needs of those who were marginalized within the mainstream and whose needs fell outside of the mainstream system, this finding also was very obvious for us. However, in terms of overall satisfaction with universities' response, students from all socioeconomic classes appeared to be equally satisfied with the university's responses to COVID-19 according to this survey. Now, my colleague Raju Kirjigi shall explain the financial concerns of the students.
Raju needs to unmute.
Yeah. Hello everyone, myself Raju Karchike. I'm a research fellow at IIHED in OP Jindal Global University. Now we can talk about the financial concern. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we all know all the academic activities, including research, including teaching and research, basically survey, so transition to online. The students, especially the students from non-privileged backgrounds, faced financial difficulties, such as having to arrange digital infra to participate in academic activities. HAS also had to introduce, many austerity measures regarding student scholarship and allowances. So we conducted survey based on the by gender identity. So in this, for example, like on the basis of gender identity, to understand the financial difficulties faced by the man, women, and the third gender.
Yes, Raju.
Yes, ma'am. So another one is like analysis by social class. So in our survey, students from different socio-economic classes were asked about their financial hardships experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this, the main finding we came across is like the survey actually shows that students from low income and working class groups faced four financial hardships compared to students from other socio-economic groups, especially in arranging digital infrastructure for their studies. The thing, actually, this thing nowadays, we are most of the researchers they are talking about the digital divide. So basically, there are four parameters we have considered, in this, like unexpected increase in spending for technology. So in this case, the families, those who belong to low income or poor classes, 51%, they in the survey, they mentioned that, they faced a lot of difficulties in our, because of the unexpected increase in the spending of technology. Even even in case of working class also, the 18% of the students, they mentioned that they also faced in the most of the 18% of the students, they mentioned that they lost their scholarship, and also some of the universities they reduced the scholarship amount during the pandemic. And also in the living expenses also, overall, like even the working class and the middle class families, they face a lot of difficulties. And also in case of wealthy class, the 45%, even 45%, they also, it was very difficult for them to sudden transition when all the academic activities transition to online. So this is our main finding. So students from this entire analysis, so we came to know the students from low income and working class group face more financial hardships compared to students from other socio-economic groups. So especially in arranging digital infra for their studies.
Thank you, Raju. We can move to the next presenter now, Sandal Agarwal, to talk about students' health and well-being during the pandemic and the sense of belonging.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Raju, for explaining the above dimensions. Now I'm going to cover the two dimensions here. First is health and students' health and mental health and well-being, and second dimension, students' belongingness and their engagement during the pandemic. So as we have seen COVID pandemic in last 2 years, so it has impacted on all population, particularly in disadvantaged communities and individuals which are employed as an essential workers. But here, college students are among the most severely impacted by the virus. As college students, concerns about their academic success, future careers, and social life during college, among other things, were deeply impacted by the pandemic. Students across the world were experiencing rising levels of anxiety, depressive moods, psychosomatic disorders, substance addiction, and suicidality even before the pandemic. As a result, students may require additional resources and services to cope with the disease's physical and mental health consequences. This recent SERO survey highlights some of the documented impacts of COVID-19 on college students' health and well-being. Many feel increased stress levels and anxiety and depressive symptoms because of changed delivery and uncertainty of university education, technological concern of online courses, social isolation, decreased family income, unsafe home space, social identity, and future employment. These impacts have been also observed in university across India. So the above two graphs have been divided by social class and by gender, where I'm going to cover the mental health and their well-being. And in the last two graphs, I'm going to cover whether the students have felt safe and protected at their home by social class and by gender. So students were asked how often When we talk about feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge by social class, students were asked how often they have been bothered by problems like feeling little interested or pleasured in doing things, or down, depressed, or hopeless, nervous, anxious, or on edge, and not being able to stop worrying. When asked about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge, 20% from low income group mentioned that they were experiencing some nervousness, anxiety, or an edge nearly daily during the COVID-19 pandemic. Major contributors to such nervousness, anxiety, or an edge, such were students from upper middle class or professional middle class, which were 19%. Working class, there were 17% working class, 15% wealthy class, and 14% middle class who were feeling nervousness, anxiety, or an edge on most of the days. The survey also shows that the students that irrespective of socioeconomic class, most students face high level of stress, anxiety, and worries during the pandemic. If we categorize this dimension by gender, so various studies have found that women suffer more from mental diseases at higher rate than men all around the world. There are a lot of perceptions towards the third gender within the education institutions, like lack of acceptance of their identity by majority of classmates and teachers. While the COVID-19 situation has had a detrimental influence on many people's life, its consequences are likely worsening the problems of transgender and non-binary people. When students were asked about their feeling on being nervous or anxious or on edge, 38% of third gendered students answered to feel it on several days, whereas 14% female students and 21% of male students who self-described themselves, they were 18%, and students who preferred not to answer, 19%, were also feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge on several days. But there were 65% of female students who were feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge on several days during COVID-19 pandemic. Furthermore, there are approximately 43% of students from third gender were feeling same on more than half of the days. Gender-based analysis of the survey shows that all genders were somehow feeling nervous, anxious, hopeless, down, or depressed, or on edge on most of the days. The mental health and the well-being of all gender groups were highly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. When we talk about the belongingness and engagement, the survey shows that the most of the students from upper middle class or professional middle class had a safer space to live, which was free from physical, emotional abuse, safe, protected, free from drug or alcohol abuse, and their identity was respected during COVID-19 pandemic. Mostly, students from wealthy class did not feel that their place to live was safer, protected, and free from alcohol or drug abuses than students from other classes. This was further followed by students from low income or poor class category who also did not feel safe, protected, or free from various abuses during the pandemic. This finding is quite interesting and highlights that sense of belongingness is lowest amongst the richest and the poorest. Gender-based analysis shows that the mostly male students felt that their place to live was safer, protected, and free from abuse of drugs, alcohol, physical and emotional violence, and respected their identity. To some extent, the female students also had a safer and protected place to live during pandemic, but the students who belong to the third gender and who also self-describe themselves felt that it is only sometimes true or no, never true that their place to live is safer, protected, or free from all abuses. Now, Nisha ma'am is going to cover the future plans of the students. Thank you.
Professor Nisha Nair will present next. Professor Nair, you need to unmute. Professor Nair, you need to unmute. The famous quote of the pandemic. You need to unmute. Yes, you are unmuted. Now you can speak.
All right. So, with respect to the graduation and future plans, the survey revealed that COVID-19 had a significant negative impact on graduating students in the year 2020 and 2021, especially on those who planned to work immediately after graduation, who needed to conduct field research and therefore were not able to collect data through their field work, and STEM students who were not able to access the practical labs and workshops, which were essential for them to acquire vocational skills. Now, students from central, state, public, and private universities pursuing postgraduate and doctoral courses were asked how the COVID-19 pandemic obstructed their progress towards their graduate and professional degree. Under this, factors such as postponed dissertation or defense, increased care work at home, inadequate access to quality advising and faculty, a distraction in the home environment, and inability to conduct research were considered. Of these, inability to conduct research was one of the major obstacles cited by the survey respondents, with over 67 students from the Central University, 21% from the State Public University, and 21% from private universities, citing it as a leading obstacle in their course completion. The second prominent obstacle faced by students was distracting home environment with lack of access to appropriate study space, wherein 57% of respondents from Central University, 21 from the state public, and 21 from private universities stated that they faced similar issues. Analysis of the survey data indicate that students from the central and state public universities faced more obstacles in completing their master's and doctoral degrees compared to students from private universities during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, students were asked about their experiences with their advisors or faculty mentors, support during the COVID-19 pandemic, and their experiences in seeking the help of their advisors and faculty mentors in seeking funding to financially support their continued education. Overall, the data analysis indicate that students from private and state public universities were mostly satisfied with faculty advisor and mentor support in conducting their research during campus closure, in seeking funding to financially support themselves and their education, and in preparing for career and job market as compared to students from Central University. Next slide, please. As has been mentioned by Dr. Mon at the beginning of this presentation, this survey was conducted online to understand student experience during the pandemic. Therefore, the survey responses has some limitations which had to be noted. A major limitation of the study is that majority of respondents out of 6,425 responses belong to the middle class and upper middle class or professional middle class students. The other major limitation was that only 38 universities participated in the survey. Out of these 38 universities, students from only 4 central universities, 20 state universities, and 14 private universities responded to the survey, which was floated online. Therefore, there is a possibility of skewing the analysis, which is based on the data that is collected through the online survey. But despite these limitations, analysis of the survey provides some important findings about the student experiences, and it leads us to certain conclusions which is emerging from the data. So the analysis indicate that women and third gender students adapted well to the online transition as compared to men. This is probably because studying online from home was more accessible for women and third gender students in the sample. The survey indicates that there were no significant differences across socioeconomic classes when it came to adaptation to online transition of teaching and learning. This could be because of sampling bias, with majority of respondents belonging to upper middle class or professional middle class, who took online the survey, and they already had access to digital technology. It can also be observed that students from multidisciplinary universities found it comparatively easier to adapt to online instruction as compared to specialized universities such as agriculture, technical, medical, law, and management. This was probably because in sample, percentage of respondents from multidisciplinary universities pursuing courses with less need for practical and lab work was higher. Specialized university students could not perform lab and field work, thus faced greater challenges. Lack of interaction and communication with peer in the classroom emerge as two most significant obstacles faced by students during the online classes. The data indicate that students from private universities appear to be more satisfied with the way their universities responded to the COVID-19 pandemic as compared to students from the central and state public university. These include the satisfaction with the support that the students receive from their instructors, and the overall quality of the course. The survey also indicates that students from low income and working class groups faced more financial hardship, especially in arranging digital infrastructure for their studies. The students from central universities face more financial hardship compared to students from state, public, and private university. Again, this is probably because the student body in central university is more diverse, with more students from relatively poor socioeconomic background as compared to private universities, where students may face entry-level barrier owing to prohibitive fee structure. It can be noted that irrespective of the socioeconomic class, students faced high level of stress and anxiety and worries during the pandemic. The mental health and well-being of all was highly impacted owing to the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. Now, based on the findings discussed so far, the following recommendations can be made. So in future, there's a need for a diverse approach to be followed in gathering data across the country about student experiences, because the current study is primarily based on online survey, and that in itself poses certain limitation with respect to who can access and respond to this data, to the survey, and therefore affect the data. So it is suggested that there are more collaborative efforts undertaken when data is collected pan-India for such studies. The universities also need to focus on redesigning their courses to meet the requirement of online transaction, considering what works in the physical classroom does not work in the online classrooms. The university and faculty need to create virtual spaces and allow time and opportunity for students to have more peer interactions outside classroom hours during virtual operation. Faculty and administration need to provide greater support to students, especially when the classes are completely online during emergencies and campus lockdowns, such as the current situation owing to the pandemic. Financial institutions and universities need to build a corpus for emergency crisis management fund to support students during similar emergencies in future. This could be funded from the corporate social responsibility investments across private and public sector. Irrespective of the socioeconomic and gender background of students, universities need to develop a robust mental health and well-being support service for all the students in future. And finally, a special emergency and crisis management cell needs to be established in universities to assist students with administrative processes for graduation and transition to future career and workplace during emergencies in the future. Thank you. Or now I would request Dr. Mukherjee to take over.
Thank you, Professor Nisha Nair. I'm going to stop sharing the slides now. We have our discussant here with us, Professor Indranath Gupta, who is the Dean of Research and Jean Monnet Chair at OPJGU Global University, to share his thoughts as the discussant of this panel discussion, where we shared the findings from the Sero India survey. Professor Gupta, over to you.
Thank you. Yes. I know I should be able to do this after a long time.
Yeah, yesterday our Vice Chancellor said you have to unmute has become the most popular slogan.
That is true. That is quite true. But on that note,
last 2 years, the most popular quote.
Absolutely. I thank all of you. Maushumi, Nisha, Deepak, Prerna, and other colleagues. I'm sorry, I haven't got
Sandal and Raju.
Sandal and Raju, thank you very much for inviting me. I did manage to go over the entire report, and it just looked fascinating to me. A very interesting read. Not only just the executive summary. I have few sort of pointers I thought it might be interesting. I mean, it is nothing to do with the report per se, but something that sort of crossed my mind. If you happen to sort of take it to 2.0 from here on, then what can be done? Additionally, what can be done? But congratulations to, of course, the team, OPJGU and AIU, who have jointly worked, I believe, in this project. Thank you very much again for inviting me. Something that crossed my mind, to start with would be, as I went through the report, I looked at owing to different circumstances, students were satisfied, dissatisfied, and so on and so forth. So something that crossed my mind, what kind of definitional boundaries have we assigned, how would you go about in saying that I'm, satisfied? Should we relate that to, some kind of background? Should we relate to some kind of definitional parameters just to understand what it exactly means? As an individual, I may have a very different level of satisfaction. I probably would be responding in a very different manner. And even as a reader of the report, I may want to understand, okay, satisfaction means something because I come from a different, background, and my understanding as an individual would be very different. So this is something, a small suggestion, that you may want to consider in, version 2. Something that also interested me when I was reading, you said about that students were quite sort of, they could adapt depending on the gender, of course. I'm not going to get into details. I was wondering whether you were able to capture, these are a few of the questions that crossed my mind, whether you were able to capture any dropout rates from students who are probably in the first year to second year to third year, whether they dropped out of their program. That's something very interesting. It'd be interesting to read that, just to understand the implications of, fully understand the implications of COVID-19. Further on, I also thought that although it is just, looking at students at the level of the universities and technical universities and so on and so forth, and doctoral scholars, what about the difficulties perhaps students have faced when they have graduated from school, higher school, to university, whether they were willing to take up admissions, whether they were in a position to take up admissions at all. So are we only considering students who are currently in universities, right? So that's something that again crossed my mind. So this transition from being in school to being in a graduate program is something, maybe, I have missed out, so apologies for that, but it sort of crossed my mind. Further, something that also I believe, and Moshmi, do please correct me. This funding has also come from abroad, I believe. I'm not sure, but you have partners who are outside India, right? Now, it's somewhere in the report we talk a lot about private space and so on and so forth, right? Now, in India, I mean, that is something that we probably have released after the COVID pandemic started in 2020, that how important it is to have private space, be it a student, be it anyone, and how all of us sort of struggle sort of to ensure that, whether classes are happening, assignments are done, office work, is happening, and so on and so forth. So it becomes really difficult. So the understanding of private space is very different if you look at India, and if you would compare that to abroad. So the structure in terms of your house, in terms of your home, the planning, additional room, and so on and so forth, these are extremely different conceptual dimensions are there. And it probably we need to sort of also, if we are running this survey in India, we may have to do a background study. So when we are passing it to our friends and colleagues abroad, right, it might be of interest to them to understand, what kind of private space are we talking about here? We may not have an extra room to start with. The other thing, and it may sort of, you may have covered it in the concluding part of the report, is to what extent online, online platform and online the system that we have right now, the ecosystem that we have right now, would sort of replace the physical environment, and what percentage of that we probably would continue to sort of, follow and use, given that there are advantages and disadvantages, as you have said, about the positives and the negatives, right, in your report. So that is something that you may want to consider again. Then something that again crossed my mind. I'm sorry, please stop me if I'm running out of time. But I sort of read it with keen interest, and I thought I'll just share these pointers with you. It's talked about financial concerns, right? Financial concerns about access to technology and so on and so forth. Now, there is a good analogy perhaps you can draw, or your colleagues can draw from the fact that the use of disruptive technology in India, right? Now, we have, sort of transitioned from just having computers at different homes to having smartphones, right? So we are proud, sort of, in that to have that kind of transition, and everyone is able to have a smartphone and being able to access, the smartphone and so forth, because the pricing and other things are also connected to that, right? So what percentage of, so how this disruptive technology essentially has helped India, given that, there is, of course, issue of digital divide, as we all know. So it might be worthwhile to sort of touch upon in version 2, of course, right, to where it stands in terms of what point have we reached, so much so that mobile phone technology, by using a smartphone, we are able to attend classes and so on and so forth. Something you also have talked about, the issue of funding, and scholarships and so on and so forth. Something very interesting that I found in the report was that, funding was a problem in case of central universities. And if I've read it correctly, and if I've understood correctly, and apologies if I haven't, and it kind of strange, because the funding that we kind of assume would dry up is where in the private universities, where they would rely on tuition from students, right? As you rightly said, that many of the IIMs wouldn't actually rely any on government funding. They probably would rely on just funding from students. So it's kind of, it'd be interesting to hear any kind of thoughts on that part as to, and if you have found anything else, because why did the funds dry up there? Because I don't think government stopped anything during these times, and if they have, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Something also I want to touch about mental health, and something very important that we are all sort of worried about. And I was not clear, and maybe you can sort of reflect upon this as well. The numbers that you have have found and then sort of reflected upon in your report, whether they were in relations to the surroundings that affected the mental health, or was it in relation to the academics, or my studies not going well, my admission is not, my scholarship is dried up, and so on and so forth. So I was not able to differentiate between the two. Again, it could be my fault absolutely in reading that. Apologies again. So yes, I mean, I must stop here. I can go on. I'm sorry, I'm just, I went on, but I thought I'll just share these pointers again. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you. I stop here.
Thank you, Professor Gupta, for your insightful comments. But let me first begin by telling you this survey, because you mentioned about capturing the experience of high school students and their transition to higher education. But let me tell you right at the beginning, this was really outside the scope of this survey, because this survey was primarily designed to capture student experience in research universities. That's the full form of the acronym SERO. So student experience in research universities during the pandemic. So that's the reason, but it's a really good idea. We can even think of developing and designing a survey and try to capture experiences of high school students and their transition, difficulties of their transition in the middle of the pandemic. So that's a really good idea. Thank you for sharing that thought. With regards to also the issue that you just raised about funding and finance and the differences in experiences of students in the private sector, private universities versus central and state universities, particularly the finance issue with regards to central university. I would like to highlight this to you. This is something towards the beginning of the presentation, my colleague Deepak actually did highlight that this is probably due to a kind of a sampling bias that we had, and frankly this is something we could not do anything about it. You see, of all the students who had participated in our survey, only 3% of them were from central universities. 3% from central universities, 32% from state public university, and 65% were from state private universities. So large majority of our survey, for some reason, was taken on by students who are studying in private universities. Now, we are assuming, we are as we are analyzing why is this, and this is why in policy recommendation, Professor Nair mentioned that we'll probably need to think about more multimodal way of data collection, because we conducted the survey purely online. Now, most likely in students who are studying in private universities, they are coming from a much more well-resourced background, and that could be that has probably led to a kind of a sampling bias. Also, we have captured the student experiences, large majority of whom are studying, 65% are studying in state private universities, and only 32 in state public and 3% in central universities. And that bias has come probably from the methodology itself of trying to capture the student experiences through online survey with the existing digital divide that we have, a deep digital divide that we have in our country. And as you know, in central universities and state public universities, much more diverse group of students study there. Than it is in the private universities. So this our methodology itself and the sampling bias could have created, some of the problems that you have highlighted in terms of what we are seeing in our findings. So that's why we are not generalizing, that this is a representative sample or representative experience of students across India. And we have highlighted this limitation right at the beginning. Maybe in the report also we need to create a very highlighted section right at the beginning, highlighting the limitations of the survey and the findings, so that we can't generalize based on the survey findings as such. My colleague Deepak Mohan would also like to add some more comments now. Deepak, over to you.
Thanks, Moshmi. Thanks, Dr. Gupta. It was really insightful and interesting that you have gone in such details. Thanks for taking time for that. So I'll start from back. Actually, I want to specifically address the issue of this funding issue at central universities. The sampling bias, apart from being a smaller sample, interestingly, I've discussed this in the sample. For private and state universities, the respondents are mostly UG students. In case of central universities, it is PG, PhD students. And for them, because the fundings, especially UGC, there was cut in the fundings, the scholarships that were being given for some time that was stopped. Secondly, for several of the students who were towards the fag end of their PhD dragged on, their MPhils dragged on, but the funding was stopped. They were allowed to complete the degree, but they were not given the funding. So that could be one of the reasons why that is being reflected in the survey. Second, you have talked about the mental health. That's a very valid point. What is the cause of this? This study was not designed to understand what was causing this mental health issue and what was the contribution that would probably. It's a very relevant study, a very valid argument, but it will be a completely different kind of study that needs to be designed, which will specifically look at those aspects. And in fact, I completely agree with your point where we need to make this clear to the international audience that the context where we come from within India, this having an extra room, or we have situations where a whole family of 5, 6 lives in a single room, or which also serves as the kitchen. And that's where I think you talked about the physical campus and its importance. This university as a space of equalization of opportunities. Even the students who are coming from such backgrounds where in the family, in the house, there is no space. These people come to the university, they get into the hostels. That privacy for them, it is afforded to them for the first time in their lives. The library, the reading rooms, these spaces are not available, such private spaces, or even within public they have spaces where they can sit and study. Those spaces are afforded within university. I think that's a very valid reason why these physical campuses are crucial, especially within these contexts, and online cannot replace it completely. That's one of the thoughts that comes to my mind. And I think we have had several discussions during the pandemic on that. About the mobile penetration issue, definitely, I mean, how much was on mobile, how much was on tablets or laptops, and what is the mobile penetration, etc. There have been several other surveys and reports which show the biases, which show that, in fact, anecdotally, I know of students, some of the faculty colleagues at a state university in Delhi. I was talking to her and I was asking whether their classes are going online, and she was like, "It's a state private university and an engineering university at that." And she mentioned that their students are from a lot of them are from poor families, and they cannot afford with 1 GB data. They cannot attend all the classes, and beyond that, they cannot afford it. So those kind of issues, definitely those divides do exist. The last thing that I would want to say about your observation on the satisfaction. In fact, one thought which had not crossed my mind, but interestingly, with your understanding of how do you define satisfaction, I don't know how students are defining satisfaction. It's up to them. But interesting the students, combined with your question about transition from 12th to university. Now, a student who is in second year has some idea that how a physical campus operates and what is the kind of learning they can get there. But when you are a first year student who has never been to university, has never experienced that, how are you saying that you are satisfied or not satisfied? That itself would be different. I think I agree with your point on that, that even that will be different, that the way you are defining satisfaction, especially for someone who has not experienced the campus. So these were some of the thoughts, responses to whatever you have said. Thanks, Dr. Gupta, to you.
No, I think as I've told you, thank you so very much, Deepak, and please call me Indranath. Yeah, and Moshumi, I'm calling by you by your first name, so please, I'm absolutely okay with that. I think you have touched upon a fascinating point about how university space possibly creates an environment where students can come in and avail all kind of facilities, regardless of what kind of background they're coming from. I think that's a very good point. Some of the pointers that I was thought so the moment I read the report, your I think 44 pages report, I congratulate again. These are some pointers that may be useful to have some sort of research agenda later on as well. Something that you have said, why I sort of talked about satisfaction and dissatisfaction and other understanding, because a lot of what we teach, a lot of what we understand, we always define it from an objective perspective and subjective perspective, right? The objective perspective, it's not a purely objective in my of the opinion, right? You cannot have a purely objective. It subjective sits in the objective interpretation of anything. Now, if you do not have a perception, as you correctly said, if you do not have a perception, if you do not know how a home looks like, or a house looks like, how does it feel to stay in a house which has a couple of rooms or 3 rooms, right? Then you wouldn't be able to, fathom, with what I'm satisfied with, right? So that perception. So I was thinking, again, version 2, nothing to do with this report, then maybe some sort of, literature can be sort of consulted just to talk about what it means. And sometimes it might sort of also help, when you are distributing the survey form, just to give some sort of perception, so that students also, or respondents also, are able to sort of gather some thoughts before they start responding, what they feel. Couple of pointers I missed out. I'm sorry. Were you able to figure out what kind of specific, satisfaction, or however you may want to put it, did students have regarding technical universities? The reason I'm saying this, because if we had problem in the delivery of online teaching, the problem would be far greater in case of technical courses, be it engineering, be it medicine, and so on and so forth. And that would also connect to the stress and anxiety of students. So when able to capture that, because something I feel that we can't do our design. Of course, we can use a software, but what about the drawings, right? How do you teach students? Of course, we have, again, people might say that there is a software you can use, whiteboard, and so on and so forth. Be that as it may, but I guess universities across are struggling. To my knowledge, they're all struggling to ensure that students are taught properly. And this is going beyond the general difficulties that we have with online delivery system that we have in the country. So when you're able to capture that aspect at all in your study, I stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we
that actually Professor Nisha Nair did. Okay, Deepak, you go ahead. Deepak, go ahead. This
Okay.
was actually covered by Nisha Nair in conclusion. But Deepak, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's a valid argument. So one of the limitations of the study was we did not look specifically at colleges. We did not get the college data, which basically means that we could have known that is it an engineering college, is it a medicine college. The effect was that we knew that, say, Gujarat Technical University, it is a technical university, and hence we had data for so technical university separately. There was some data about the medicine or law schools. So these become like fields where you need to go to the field or go to the labs, those kind of spaces. So in general, the universities which we so something like OPJGU University or Delhi University, where we know that there are so many streams. So we have categorized that as general discipline. So which basically means a multidisciplinary university, where the respondents would be from technical also, non-technical backgrounds also. So usually whenever we had technical background students, medicine or engineering, etc., they were less satisfied. That's a general finding of the survey, which basically means what you are saying is true, that these people actually, those who wanted to, had to go to the field, those who had to go to the laboratories, they were less satisfied with their experiences as compared to universities like ours, where probably apart from art and architecture, mostly students can easily work with online classes, as opposed to, because they are not required to go to labs or even field, law being an exception. Moshmi, do you want to add anything on that?
I think we have covered all the pointers. Hopefully, Professor Gupta, we have covered all the pointers that you raised, and you have also given us some really good ideas to think 2.0 of this survey in the future, and also design a new survey, another survey that could capture student experiences of students in high school, and their challenges of transition to higher education in the middle of this pandemic. Uh, Thank you for all your thoughtful comments and insights. This is surely going to help us, in the long run, for not, as you said, not for this report. When we are doing a 2.0 version of the survey in the future, or designing a new survey, we have learned a lot of lessons, of course, from running this survey. This was a good learning experience for all of us. And as I have already stated, maybe in the report we should highlight the limitations somewhere right at the beginning itself of the survey that the current report is all about, in terms of the limitations that we can't generalize, and based on this survey, findings, and the findings have their own limitations because the sampling bias, which happened because of the mode of data collection itself within the larger Indian context. So we'll have to think of more innovative ways, multimodal ways of gathering data from students, even with regards to high school students. If we are designing another survey, I don't think we can gather the kind of data that we need to gather only through an online survey mode. We tried to make that online survey mode as accessible as possible. That's why we even created a QR code, mobile-friendly survey that people can even take it on their mobile phone, even if they have one mobile phone at home, not a computer. We tried to make the survey online survey as accessible as possible, but now we are thinking that it's not enough to just do online survey. Probably we need to create, paper survey forms, get educational institutions, universities to mail them to the students, or maybe even do phone surveys, use phone technology to do the survey. So we'll have to think of more, complex ways of gathering data rather than just through online survey, particularly within such a large and diverse context like India. to capture students' experiences across the deep socioeconomic class and divide and the deep digital divide that we have. We need to think about more creative ways of data collection. Thank you all for joining this panel discussion, and thanks to Professor Indranath Gupta, Dr. Amrendra Pani from Association of Indian Universities, our partner. Unfortunately, due to an emergency at the last moment, he could not join us for this panel discussion. But we are going to soon have a public launch of this report, which the Association of Indian Universities and our university is going to jointly host. And hopefully we will see some of you over there, even if it is once again probably going to be a virtual one. And if it is maybe sometime in the new year, it could be then a physical launch of the report. Thank you all for joining, and hope all of you stay safe and stay well. And we will come live again for another session at 5 o'clock. In between, we have breakout sessions for panel discussion and thematic forums. Good afternoon and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.